during an intimate evening conversation. The narrator listens as his friend, Lionel Wallace, shares a strange and deeply personal story about a mysterious door in a wall, one that Wallace insists was real. Initially, the narrator is inclined to believe him, moved by Wallace's sincerity and the depth of his conviction. However, the next morning, doubts resurface, and he begins to see the story as something unbelievable, perhaps even a strange and compelling invention of the mind. Yet, as time goes by, the narrator's skepticism begins to wane. He gradually comes to accept that Wallace had, in all likelihood, spoken honestly and described what he genuinely believed to be true. Whether this experience was an extraordinary gift or simply a magnificent dream remained unclear. Even Wallace's untimely death, which brought the narrator's questioning to a permanent halt, offered no resolution to the mystery. The nature of the door, whether it was a doorway to another realm or just a figment of imagination, remained unresolved. Typically a composed and self-contained man, Wallace revealed a different side of himself during their talk. He spoke of fixation, a persistent vision that haunted him and took the light out of things. This obsession originated from a vivid childhood memory, an encounter with overwhelming beauty and happiness linked to the door, so profound that everything in his real life seemed dull and unfulfilling in contrast. The narrator could see that Wallace's detachment from the world was etched into his features, a look that a woman who had once loved and described as a sudden, inexplicable withdrawal of interest. Despite this inner struggle, Wallace led a successful public life, rising through professional ranks and earning widespread recognition. The narrator and Wallace had known each other since their school days at St. Athelstan's College, where Wallace consistently surpassed the narrator in academic performance. It was during those school years that the narrator first heard Wallace mention the door on the wall, though it wasn't until many years later, just a month before Wallace's death, that he would hear the full story once again. For Wallace, the door was not metaphor or illusion. It represented a genuine portal to immortal realities, an experience that began when he was a very young child, likely between 5 and 6 years old. Wallace recalled the timing of this event with precision, identifying it as autumn by the sight of crimson Virginia creeper and the fallen leaves of the horse chestnut scattered on the pavement near the green door. At that time in his life, he had been a bright and unusually mature child, largely left to his own devices due to the early death of his mother and his father's demanding career as a strict and busy lawyer. One day, while out wandering alone, young Wallace came upon a long white wall with a striking green door set into it. From the moment he saw it, he felt an overwhelming desire to open the door and step inside. At the same time, he was immediately aware that doing so might be somehow wrong or forbidden, and he had a strong sense that his father would be furious if he found out. Though the door was unlocked and ready to open, Wallace couldn't bring himself to go through it. Instead, he walked past it, trying to distract himself by whistling and observing the ordinary details of the street, including a plumber's shop just ahead. Yet throughout all of this, his longing for the green door remained intense and unwavering. Overcome by a sudden wave of emotion, young Wallace dashed toward the green door, thrust it open, and let it close with a bang behind him. Instantly, he found himself inside a garden, one that would linger in his memory and imagination for the rest of his life. Wallace found it difficult to truly capture the essence of this garden when speaking to the narrator. He described the air as invigorating, filling him with a buoyant sense of joy, health, and fortune. The colors all around him were flawless, vibrant, and softly radiant. Simply stepping into the garden filled him with a rare, almost indescribable gladness. Everything he saw was beautiful. Then he revealed an extraordinary detail. There were 2 great panthers there. Yes, spotted panthers, and I felt no fear. These large, smooth-coated creatures were playing with a ball on a broad pathway lined with marble-edged flower beds. One panther approached him in a friendly manner, brushing its soft ear against his extended hand and purring. He insisted that the garden was enchanted. The garden seemed to stretch endlessly, its distant hills making him wonder where West Kensington had disappeared to. Yet above all, he felt a powerful sensation of being home. The moment the door shut behind him, he forgot the street he'd come from, its bustle, and even the emotional ties to his actual home. All fear, hesitation, and the ordinary truths of his daily life vanished. He became a very glad and wonder-happy little boy in another world. This new place had a different essence to it, a softer, more golden light, and an atmosphere full of faint, pure happiness beneath skies filled with gently glowing clouds. He felt no fear as he stroked the panthers. It seemed to him that they recognized and welcomed him home. Soon, a tall, fair-haired girl appeared along the path, smiling warmly. She approached him, lifted him into her arms, kissed him gently, and took him by the hand. There was no astonishment in that moment, only a feeling of perfect harmony, as if joyous memories had been stirred to life again. She led him up wide steps that rose between tall stalks of delphiniums, bringing them into a majestic avenue shaded by ancient trees. Along this path stood marble seats of honor set between trunks with red bark, and gentle, familiar white doves moved about freely. The girl, whose face radiated sweetness and kindness, spoke to him in a tender, comforting voice. She asked him things and shared soft, pleasant words, though, to his frustration, Wallace could never quite recall what was said. A small capuchin monkey, clean and lively, with reddish-brown fur and friendly hazel eyes, climbed down from a tree. It ran beside them, smiling broadly, then sprang onto his shoulder, remaining with them as they walked on, surrounded by joy. Wallace remembered further moments in vivid detail. Passing an elderly man seated among laurel bushes, a lively spot full of fluttering parakeets, and eventually arriving at a vast, cool palace entered through a broad, shaded colonnade. Inside, the palace was filled with soothing fountains, beautiful objects, and the enchanting promise of finding one's heart's desire. There, he met many people, some of whom remained clear in his memory, others whose faces were only faint impressions, but all of them were kind and beautiful. They greeted him with unspoken warmth and affection, conveyed through gentle gestures, reassuring touches and the expressions in their eyes. He also found companions to play with, something particularly precious to him as a lonely child. They played games together in a grassy courtyard, encircling a sundial surrounded by flowers. He recalled that as one played, one loved. Yet, curiously, there was a blank in his memory. He could never remember the exact games they played, despite hours spent trying to recall them, even as a boy. All he could remember was the deep and genuine happiness he felt. Overcome by a surge of emotion, young Wallace burst through the green door, letting it crash shut behind him, and instantly found himself transported into a garden whose memory would haunt him forever. He struggled to describe this garden to me. The air felt intoxicating, filling him with a lightness of spirit, a sense of wellness, and a fortunate breeze that seemed to bless every breath. Colors were sharper, purer, and softly glowing, and merely stepping inside brought a joy so exquisite that outshone anything he had ever known. Everything in that place was perfect. Then he revealed an astonishing sight. 2 great panthers, spotted panthers, roamed there, and I felt no fear. These sleek, powerful creatures tossed a ball back and forth along a broad path edged with marble flower beds. One approached him, nudged his outstretched hand with its velvet ear, and purred in welcome. Wallace insisted that the garden exuded magic. The landscape extended endlessly, the hills slipping away in the distance until West Kensington seemed a distant memory. But above all else, he felt at home. The instant the door snapped shut behind him, he forgot the crowded street, the rumble of traffic, even the pull of his real home. Fear, hesitation, and daily cares dissolved, and he became a very glad and wonder-happy little boy in another world. The light there was warmer and more mellow, the atmosphere tinged with gentle, clear gladness, and the clouds above glowed with soft, sunlit halos. He stroked the panthers without a tremor, certain they recognized him as one of their own. Soon a tall, fair-haired girl emerged, her smile bright and welcoming. She lifted him into her arms, kissed his forehead, and took his hand without a hint of surprise, only a feeling of perfect, long-lost familiarity. Together, they climbed wide stone steps flanked by towering delphiniums, entering a grand avenue shaded by ancient trees. Marble seats dotted the path between red-bark trunks, and tame white doves fluttered about peacefully. The girl's voice, soft and melodious, asked him questions and shared gentle observations, though Wallace could never quite remember the words. A lively capuchin monkey, its fur warm russet and its eyes kind, scampered down from a branch. It ran alongside them, grinning broadly. then leapt onto his shoulder as they continued through fields of delight. He recalled more wonders, an old man seated beneath laurels, a lively grove alive with parakeets, and at last a wide, cool palace reached through a shaded colonnade. Inside, graceful fountains tinkled, beautiful objects gleamed, and everywhere lay a promise of heart's desire. He met many inhabitants, some faces clear, others mere impressions, but all exuded kindness and beauty. Their unspoken welcome warmed him with gentle touches and sympathetic smiles. Best of all, he discovered playmates. In a grassy courtyard encircling a sundial framed by blossoms, they played games that filled him with love as well as laughter. Yet, intriguingly, he could never recall the exact rules or names of those games, despite hours of reflection. Only the deep, uncontainable happiness remained. Then Wallace spoke of 2 dear companions he had found in that place. But as their frolic began, a solemn woman appeared. Pale of face, dreamy-eyed, draped in a long robe of soft lavender, and carrying a heavy book. She beckoned him away into a gallery overlooking the great hall, ignoring his playfellow's protests of, "Come back to us soon," with gentle authority. She guided him to a seat and opened her book. To his amazement, the illustrations sprang to life. Moving figures and changing scenes recounted every moment of his own life, from his birth, through his mother's tender care and his father's stern supervision, to the nursery and the front door opening onto West Kensington's bustling streets. He leaned forward, breathless, skimming the pages to glimpse every detail. At last he saw himself as a small boy frozen in hesitation outside the green door, gripped by desire and fear. He cried out to turn the page, but the woman's cool hand held his back. He tugged playfully at her fingers until she relented. As the page fluttered over, she bent down and kissed his brow like a comforting shadow. But the next image did not show the enchanted garden. Instead, it revealed a long, gray West Kensington street in the chill of dusk before the lamps glowed. There he stood alone, tears streaming down his cheeks, wretched at being torn from his new friends who had called, "Come back to us soon." It was no longer a scene in a book, but a harsh reality. The garden's magic and the woman's reassuring presence had vanished. Wallace fell into silence, staring into the fire as he murmured of the wretchedness of that return. He remembered the depth of his grief at being brought back, and the shame of his public sobbing. He recalled a kind old gentleman in gold spectacles, who gently prodded him with an umbrella and asked if he was lost, until a young policeman and a curious crowd escorted him home, trembling and humiliated. He arrived at his father's house, the contrast from the enchanted garden stark and painful. Wallace struggled to express how translucently unreal the garden had felt, how unlike any ordinary dream or waking moment, but insisted it had truly occurred. If it was a dream, he said, it was a rare and vivid daytime vision. Naturally, his return triggered an inquisition by his aunt, father, nurse, and tutor. He tried to share his tale, but his father punished him with his first spanking for telling lies. His aunt chastised him again for wicked persistence, and soon everyone refused to listen. Even his fairy books were confiscated, deemed too dangerous for his overactive imagination. From then on, his father's old-school discipline drove the story deep inside him. Wallace whispered to his pillow at night, oft damp with tears, and begged in prayer, "Please, God, let me dream of the garden again. Oh, take me back to my garden." He dreamed of it many times, though he admitted that memory and imagination may have woven themselves together over the years. This entire account, he explained, was his best effort to reconstruct that fragmentary, wonderful experience. Lionel Wallace spoke next of a vast gap in his recollection between that first childhood glimpse of the garden and the subsequent years of his boyhood. He confessed that for a long time afterward, he felt unable even to mention that wonder glimpse. When I asked whether, in those early years, he had ever tried to find the garden again, he shook his head. His adventures had led to a much tighter watch being kept over him at home. He went on to say that during his 8th or 9th year, incredible as it seems, he had entirely forgotten the garden's existence. Then he paused, looking at me, and asked if I remembered him at St. Athelstan's, wondering whether I had ever seen any trace of his secret vision in his behavior. The second encounter. With a sudden grin, Wallace shifted tone and asked if I ever played Northwest Passage with him. A schoolboy game in which children set off at dawn, determined to find some unorthodox route to school. One morning, after threading his way through a series of shabby side streets beyond Camp Hill, he reached what looked like a dead end. At its far end, to his astonishment, stood the same long white wall with the green door. Confronted by that familiar sight, he realized the garden must be real. He told me that the second meeting with the door felt very different. Bound by the busy life of a schoolboy, he was preoccupied with punctuality and determination to uphold his perfect attendance record. Though the door surely tugged at him, he saw it mainly as a distraction from his urgent goal, getting to school on time. Intrigued but resolute, he glanced at his watch, noted that he still had 10 minutes to spare, and hurried on. He arrived at school breathless and sweating, yet punctual, hung up his coat and hat, and left the green door behind him. Wallace looked me straight in the eye and admitted that at the time he never guessed it might vanish. He assumed that every schoolboy's imagination was limited and that the door would always stand there as a pleasant curiosity, a jolly sort of retreat during the interludes of a strenuous scholastic career. He confessed, too, that his mind wandered all that morning, filled with thoughts of the beautiful, strange people he expected to meet again. He treated the garden as nothing more than a delightful diversion. He did not return that day, nor the next, even though the following afternoon was a half-holiday, no doubt because unexpected errands or chores ate into his leisure. Sharing the secret, what he didn't know was that he could not keep such a marvel to himself. He confided in a small, sharp-eyed schoolmate nicknamed Squiff Hopkins. Despite a sense that it was against the rules, he simply could not bear to speak of anything else during their walk home. Unsurprisingly, Hopkins betrayed him. The very next day, during morning play, Wallace found himself circled by a dozen larger boys, half mocking, half eager for the story of the enchanted garden. He recalled Big Forsyth, Carnaby, Molly Reynolds, and others gathering round. His heart lifted briefly when Major Crawshaw's son declared the best lie he'd ever heard. But the triumph was fleeting, and Wallace realized that some wonders are too precious to share. Lionel Wallace winced as he remembered the acute shame of having exposed what he considered a sacred secret. He recalled Beast Forsyth cracking a coarse joke about the girl in green, an anecdote so mortifying that his voice still faltered at the memory. Then Carnaby, emboldened by the others, accused him of lying and demanded proof, twisting Wallace's arm with a threatening grin. Wallace, cheeks flaming with excitement and fear, insisted his tale was true and offered to lead them all to the green door within 10 minutes. Despite Crawshaw's attempt to calm the situation, Wallace, caught up in bravado, found himself at the head of a mocking, curious, and menacing procession of 6 schoolfellows, his heart heavy with dread and humiliation, a lost path and lingering pain. They scoured the streets in vain. Wallace simply could not relocate the white wall and the green door. He swore that had he been able, he would have shown them the way. Yet, each solitary search during his school years ended in disappointment. Meanwhile, Carnaby convened a mock council accusing him of want and lying, and the other boys made life difficult. Wallace snuck home each evening, wiping away the tracks of his tears, but when he finally wept himself to sleep, it wasn't over the boys' cruelty. It was grief for the lost garden, the vanished afternoon of wonder, the gentle woman, his waiting playmates, and the beautiful forgotten game he couldn't revive. He believed fiercely that, had he kept a secret, life might have taken a different course. In the month that followed, he drifted through 2 terms of poor effort and bad marks, daydreaming in class and crying at night, until it was the narrator's own success in mathematics that last brought me back to the grind again. The door reappears. Wallace paused, staring into the hearth, then confessed that he did not see the door again until he was 17. It returned unexpectedly one day as he rattled toward Paddington in a hansom cab, en route to Oxford on a scholarship. Leaning out, cigarette in hand, he spotted the wall and door and felt once more the stir of unforgettable yet attainable things. He tapped the cab roof to stop, but then, checking his watch, told the driver it was a mistake and urged him on. That night, seated by his fireside in his new rooms, buoyed by his father's rare praise and sound advice, he reflected on his narrow choice. Had he paused, he would have forfeited a scholarship in Oxford, muddled all the fine career before me, he thought. He persuaded himself that the path he chose was the right one. Though the garden and its dear friends still called him, they seemed very sweet but remote compared to the open door of his professional future. As the firelight flickered, it caught the stubborn resolve in Wallace's features. He sighed, acknowledging the years of much hard work he had given to his career, but admitted that he had dreamed of the enchanted garden 1,000 times, glimpsing the door on 4 more occasions. For a long while, the allure of success in society, pretty women and distinguished men, dwarfed the desire to pat panthers at play. Returning to London from Oxford as a man of promise, he had achieved much, though not without disappointments. He spoke briefly of 2 loves. On one occasion, en route to see a lover who doubted his courage, he took an unfamiliar shortcut near Earl's Court, and there, to his astonishment, he came upon a white wall and that familiar green door once more. That afternoon, as he hurried along, Wallace caught sight of the familiar wall and green door and thought to himself, "How odd! I always assumed this was on Campden Hill." It felt to him like glimpsing the location of a half-forgotten daydream, as elusive as counting the monoliths at Stonehenge. Yet he pressed on toward his appointment, feeling no temptation to pause. He even had a brief urge, a mere 3 steps off course, to open the door, sure it would yield as it always had. But he worried that stopping might delay him where his honor was at stake. Later, he regretted his punctuality, lamenting that he hadn't at least peeped in to wave to the panthers. By then, however, he had learned that what cannot be found by seeking cannot be recovered by belated search. The tarnishing of life's luster. That mischance left him aching with regret. He threw himself into years of work, but never saw the door again, until quite recently, when it reemerged in his mind's eye, casting a thin tarnish over his world. He began to view the door's absence as a sorrowful and bitter thing, fearing he might never glimpse it again. Perhaps it was overwork or the feeling of 40, but that keen brightness that once made effort effortless had dimmed, especially at a time of new political developments, when he ought to be at his best. Life now felt toilsome, its rewards oddly hollow as they came into view. He admitted, in a tone of quiet desperation, that he wanted the garden quite badly. He confessed that he had seen the door 3 more times but never entered. Leaning forward, voice laden with sorrow, he repeated, "Thrice I have had my chance. Thrice." He swore that if it should appear again, he would step through, leave behind this dust and heat, this dry glitter of vanity, these toilsome futilities, and never return. Yet each time the door presented itself over the past year, he passed by 3 missed opportunities. The first came on the night of the crucial snatch division on the Tenants' Redemption Bill, which saved the government by only 3 votes. No one expected that debate to turn so late. Jones and I were dining unpaired when the whip's telephone call summoned us. Hot-footed to his cousin's motor, we roared to the house, arriving just in time. On the way, the moonlight revealed the white wall and green door, smeared with the yellow glare of our headlights but unmistakable. I cried out, and Hotchkiss asked what was the matter. I lied and said nothing, and the moment passed. I confessed to the whip that I had made a great sacrifice, but he only sniffed, "They all have," and hurried me inside. I now realized I could not have acted otherwise. His second mischance came when he rushed to bid his stern father farewell on his deathbed. Again, the claims of life were imperative. But the third time occurred just a week ago, an occasion that still sets his blood burning with remorse. He was walking with Gurker and Ralphs after dinner. Everyone knew he had been negotiating with Gurker about a place in the reconstructed ministry, and tension hovered in the air. He longed for a firm word of assurance, but dreaded letting Ralph sense his anxiety. He hoped Ralph would leave them past Kensington High Street, so he could speak to Gurker alone. As they strolled, deep in guarded conversation, he became aware, out of the corner of his eye, of that white wall and green door ahead. They passed within 20 paces. He thought, if I bid them good night and slip in, what then? But he was preoccupied with securing a clear verdict from Gurker and feared they would think him mad. A prominent politician vanishing without warning. 1,000 petty worldly cares pressed upon him. Finally, he turned to me with a bitter smile and whispered, Here I am. That chance has slipped away from me," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. 3 times in 1 year that door, my doorway to peace, to joy, to a beauty beyond imagining, and a kindness no one else can know, appear before me. And each time I turn away, Redmond, and now it is gone. He spoke with cold certainty that the door would not return, leaving him to resume the demanding duties that had consumed him. He brushed aside whatever claim he had won as a vulgar, tiresome, enviable thing, crushing a walnut in his hand to show how little it mattered, a soul filled with regret. I am being undone by this loss, he confessed. For the past 2 months he had attended to nothing but the barest necessities of his office. His soul was brimming with unquenchable remorse. Under cover of darkness, when he might not be recognized, he would roam the streets, lamenting the missed opportunity of that door and the garden beyond it. A grief so profound he knew that people would be astonished to learn a full cabinet minister and head of department could mourn so deeply. The final enigma. I remember his face, pale in the firelight, and the sad intensity in his eyes. Little more than 24 hours later, the newspaper reported his death, and the club was in an uproar. His body had been discovered early that morning in a deep excavation near East Kensington Station, one of 2 shafts dug for a railway extension. The site was surrounded by hoardings, but a small, unsecured doorway, left open by a misunderstanding between foremen, provided access. My mind raced with questions. Did Wallace, as was his habit, set out on one of his nocturnal walks and mistake the hoardings planks of the familiar white wall? Did the unlatched door awaken a half-forgotten memory? Was there ever truly a green door in that wall? I have related Wallace's story as faithfully as I can. At times, I wondered if he had been the victim of a fluke, a rare hallucination colliding with a careless trap. Yet such suspicions never satisfied me. Call me superstitious or foolish if you will, but I am more than half convinced that Wallace possessed an extraordinary gift, a kind of intuition or sense, something I cannot name, that, in the form of that wall and its door, offered him a secret passage into a more wondrous world. Many will say that this gift betrayed him in the end. But did it? Here lies the deepest mystery of dreamers and men of vision. From any practical standpoint, Wallace stepped from security into darkness, danger, and death. Yet did he truly see it so?